Happy Earth Day, friends. We are here today with Kumi Naidoo. That we've held since the release of our film for the last month, discussing water, ecosystem regeneration, collective liberation, climate justice. Hi, Kumi.
Hi, good to be with all of you.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Earth Day. It's really an honor. To speak with you as one of the main leaders in this global struggle for climate justice and for an end to fossil fuel production. So just for introduction, Kumi has been on the front lines of various struggles for environmental justice and collective liberation for many decades, your whole life as an anti-apartheid activist in South Africa, and as a director of both Greenpeace International and Amnesty International, and is the current president of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, a joint diplomatic and civil society campaign to create a treaty to stop fossil fuel exploration and expansion and to phase out existing production in line with the targets of the Paris Agreement. Thank you so much, Kumi, for joining us. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure, and we want to discuss where we are in the struggle for climate justice, but also weave it with the work for water and ecosystem regeneration. But before we go there, I would love to just ask you a little bit about even your personal story and journey as an activist. Maybe you could share with us, like, what inspired you to start as an environmental activist? Like, what was maybe an inflection point for you as a young person to step onto this path?
So I started my activism at the age of 15 as a high school student, standing up against the injustice of inequality in our education system, where white kids were being invested on like a very high level and the rest of the society kids were having very little, so therefore poor quality education. And that got me expelled from school and that kind of thing, which was, it turned out a good thing to have happened because that introduced critical thinking into my vocabulary very young. I think the first major environmental struggle I was engaged in was in 1983, sort of 3 years after I got involved, around the age of 17, 18. And it was around a water crisis in the city where I grew up, where there was severe drought. And as a result, there were water fines being imposed on people if they used more than 400 liters a day in a household. But in the working class neighborhood where I lived, there was a system where there'd be 8 flats but 1 water meter, and everybody, they would just kind of divide the water use so that you had pensioners who were in hospital for the entire time. When they come back, they haven't used a drop of water, but there's a big water fine. So that, and there we successfully fought that. And so water, for me, is one of the most earliest introductions into environmental activism because, you know, as the Native American community says, when the last tree has been cut, the last river has been polluted, the last fish has been caught, will man realize that you cannot drink money, right? And so, but to be honest, the imperatives of the struggle against apartheid were all consuming. And it took me quite some time before I fully embraced the critical need for climate action. And if I'm brutally honest, I'm a little bit embarrassed that because I came from a very human rights and democracy background, that I did not embrace the centrality of climate justice and environmental justice for humanity's future. So I'm grateful to my daughter and other young people in my family who got it before I did and pushed me in the direction to embrace it fully.
And what were some of your milestones um, that have led you to your current work?
So I served as as the head of Greenpeace from 2009 to 2015, which meant I led the organization from the Copenhagen climate negotiations to the Paris climate negotiations. And then I also helped set up an African-wide social movement after that called Africans Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity that has a very clear climate justice component to their work. And then when I served Amnesty International as the Secretary General from 2018, I, by this stage, was going into Amnesty to partly make the connection between climate justice and human rights, and to say that, you know, there are no jobs on a dead planet, as the trade unions say, and there are no human beings on a dead planet. And so there are no human rights on a dead planet. So the connection, all of those experiences took me there, and now I completely believe that we've been addressing the challenge of climate change wrong. So let me just give you your viewers a image, right? Assuming you come home from work, right, and you discover that you left the stopper in your bath on, assuming you had a bath, right, and the tap was left on and was dripping, 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 and by the time you get home, it's overflowed. There's water all over the bathroom and the passageway. What do you do? Do you take the mop and you start wiping the floor first, or do you first go and turn off the tap, right, and then start mopping up? The way we've been dealing with climate change for 30 plus years is we've been mopping up without turning off the tap, because 85% or more of the cause and driving of climate change is our addiction to fossil fuels, oil, coal, and gas. And unless we shut the tap off, we don't stand a chance to prevent us getting, way overshooting 1.5 degrees, which was the target that the science had set, and that's what was negotiated in Paris. So think about it, right?
Mm,
Imagine we've had 28 years of negotiations before 85% plus of the problem of what drives climate change, fossil fuels, was even mentioned in a climate outcome document from the
right.
COPs. That's as ridiculous as Alcoholics Anonymous having 28 years of conferences, and it takes them 28 years before they mention alcohol in their outcome document, right? And the reason for that is because the largest delegation year in, year out to the climate negotiations, called the Conference of the Parties to the UN Climate Change Framework Convention, that's where you get COP from, the largest delegations are always the fossil fuel industry, right? And they've been very, very, and they're super wealthy, they control many of our governments and so on. So therefore, it is a bit tragic that in fact we have the situation. To stay with the Alcoholics Anonymous imagery, that's like the largest delegation to an Alcoholics Anonymous conference is the alcohol industry,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so therefore, I landed at the Fossil Fuel Treaty Non-Proliferation Initiative because I believe we have to, as fast as possible, not to phase out fossil fuels. We should not be investing any new money in new fossil fuel projects, and we need to make sure that the transition away from a fossil fuel addicted economic model to one that is driven by clean, renewable energy, which is now clearly within human capability to do. All that is missing is political will.
Right. Yeah, thank you for these powerful and I find very apt analogies. And there's also such a divide, no, between like the rhetoric of all the goodwill statements and the actual, as you say, political will to implement them. So maybe could you talk a little bit more about the initiative that you're leading for phasing out fossil fuels and also how it's going?
Okay, so the good news is, even though this moment of history where we're seeing a move towards fascism and authoritarianism, climate denialism still rearing its head from the most unlikely of places like the United States, that it's understandable that people are feeling anxious. So the first thing I want to say in response to your question is, in the moment of history that we find ourselves in, pessimism is a luxury we simply cannot afford. And the pessimism that justifiably, though, emerges from our analysis, our observations, and our lived experiences must, can, and should be responded to by the optimism of our thought, our action, our creativity, our courage, and our sense of humanity. The good news is that even though things look a bit dire at the moment, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative has got serious momentum. So let me just say that this is a initiative that is both top-down and bottom-up. What do I mean by that? It is only national governments that can make treaties, so we have to be engaging with national political leadership in different countries around the world to convince them to come around the table and to negotiate a treaty where governments agree not to invest new money in fossil fuels, to phase out on the fastest possible way, and to do that in a fair and just way that does not punish workers in the fossil fuel
Hmm.
industry, nor should it punish the communities that depend on the fossil fuel infrastructure. By that I mean, for example, the women who sell fruits and vegetables outside a coal mine, right? If that mine gets shut, which it should, what happens to them? So we have to have a plan to make sure that we are supporting them. So, but to get agreement at the top, you have to have pressure from below. So there we're doing really well. We've got more than 1 million individuals that have signed up to the campaign. We've got 4,000 institutions, so from the World Health Organization to the World Council on Churches and thousands of other organizations that have endorsed it. We also have about 200 cities and subnational governments like the state of California, London, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and so on, who have endorsed, and it's giving us a push from below. We also have an alliance of 22 banks that have joined, right? Uh, and then at the governmental level, we have about 16 countries now that are participating in the process, and several more will are on the cusp of joining. And the route that we are wanting to take to get this treaty done is similar to the landmine treaty process, where forward-thinking, high-ambition countries come together and negotiate a treaty outside of the UN system, and then once it's negotiated, we take it into the UN system, right? And so that's basically where we are at. And we hope that the negotiations, our ambition is that the negotiations for the treaty will start next year. We don't, we could actually start even now. We're
Hmm.
just waiting to get a few more countries from Europe, Africa, and Latin America on board. And we suspect that will happen in the coming months. And ultimately, it's clear that if we don't turn off the tap on fossil fuels, we are going to drown. And therefore, I think the treaty initiative has so much of momentum at the moment. Not as much as we would like, by the way, but compared to most other efforts right now, it seems to be still attracting new constituency, energy, new interest, and all of that. And those all point in a positive direction for which we are grateful for.
Thank you so much for sharing. And also, yeah, there's a study that just came out saying that like 89% of humanity actually wants more radical action on climate. So it also seems like an embodiment of that really collective will of humanity. I wonder also if you could share with us the vision that you have for a just transition that this initiative might be working towards, or that informs this work.
So basically, it's important to note that 2 of the 16 countries that are leading this effort now are actually fossil fuel exporting countries.
Wow.
Colombia and Timor-Leste, right? So they say, yes, our economy is dependent on fossil fuels right now, but this dependency is what's going to kill our children and their children's future, and therefore we have to get serious. So I really want to pay big tribute to all the countries that are stepped forward, all 16 of them led by the Pacific Island states, by the way. And it's important to note that it was the Pacific Island states that's also led humanity to get the nuclear non-proliferation treaty because of all the testing that France and others were doing in the Pacific, destroying and causing devastation, which up to today, the impact is still there. And so now the just transition conversation for a long time, I think, was disproportionately focused on workers in the fossil fuel industry. Okay? Now, it's very important that we absolutely have as a high priority workers in the fossil fuel industry. But also, we must be realistic and honest that workers in the fossil fuel industry often, not always, are amongst the most privileged of workers in any industry in terms of benefits and so on. So, yes, absolutely, we stand with the trade union movement to ensure that workers who are older get proper pension and so on and not punished. Younger workers can easily be trained in for jobs in a new renewable energy and energy efficiency sector, for example, or in other industries such as in sustainable tourism, sustainable agriculture, and so on. So that's part of just transition. The second part has to be about how communities are impacted, right? So we cannot only think about the workers, we also have to think about the very communities that have dependent small businesses that set up around fossil fuel infrastructure to service the people that work in those industries and so on. There has to be a plan to make sure that things don't get shut down and people are just left in the lurch. It would not be a just transition if we did it in that way. So the other component for me has to be to address the North-South dynamic in the just transition. For the just transition to be fully wholesome, it needs to recognize what an unequal world we live in. That 88% of the world's population lives in the global south, 70% plus of the nation states in the world are located in the global south. And given that, when we look at what we call the international community, we look at how our institutions look at the UN, World Bank, IMF level, you would not believe that 88% of the people live in the global south. And sadly, this is a problem and a burden that also afflicts international NGOs, which are still far too dominated by the smaller part of the global population, right? And so this transition also must equalize power in much more fundamental ways to ensure that the world's resources and the power in the world to seek solutions is more equitably shared, which is not the case at the moment.
Yeah, and I want to ask also, so the film that we've created, Water is Love, talks about the power of local communities, the potential in restoring water cycles and ecosystems. I'm curious, from where you're coming from, what do you see as the role of local communities restoring ecosystems, and maybe also what you see as the significance of the message around this?
So for more than 20 years now, I and others have been saying that future wars will not be fought about oil, but will be fought about water. Water is the most critically important resource that we have on this planet. And we have been irresponsibly damaging, destroying, and basically throwing away the most important asset that humanity has. In fact, we have bizarre situations such that, you know, industry in many countries gets better access to high quality water than communities have access, as we saw even in the United States, in Flint, Michigan, where people were getting poisonous water, but the industry was getting, water that wouldn't damage their equipment and so on and so forth. So, so this movie is so very well timed and so very well needed. And what's for me is important is the fact that it gives hope to ordinary people that you can be part of the solution. Right now, we are living in a world where we have massive climate anxiety and eco anxiety, right? And therefore, we have a global mental health crisis, actually, right? And
Right.
in this crisis, right, what we have is, in fact, a situation where people are in despair. You got young kids saying things like, "Oh, we're not going to have kids because it's too dangerous," and that kind of thing. Mainly young girls, and it's tragic that my generation has let down young people as badly as we've let them down, right? And so, participation in terms of coming up with the solutions to respond to the crisis that we're in needs to be on a scale that humanity has never seen before. It has to be in every community, in every city, in every province, in every country, in every region, right? And mobilizing that power, that local power of communities to address the most important resource that communities need to protect and nurture and keep safe and keep sustainable is one of the most powerful concepts which Water is Love brings out in a very, very powerful way, right? And so, what do we need to be doing? We need to recognize that we are destroying our the aquifers where groundwater is stored because we have been chopping trees or we've been putting poisons and so on. So we also need to recognize that sometimes the solutions to recover our health of water provision, if you want, is about actually doing things like building local ecosystems, building more trees, directing places where when there's heavy rains, where flooding happens, how do we make sure, when that happens, when heavy rains happen, those rains are actually not washing over the topsoil and creating more problems for us, but being directed to places where the water can be stored and used for agriculture. All of these things, as Water is Love shows, is within the capability of communities. So what I hope, when I was watching Water is Love, I was like saying, my God, what we need to be doing is to make sure that the knowledge that is captured in this different stories from around the world is packaged in accessible ways and made available in handbooks and toolkits and other resources that builds on what is love, to actually make sure that people in communities are not waiting for the national government, not waiting for some foreign funder, not waiting for somebody to come and actually help them, because within every community there is knowledge and wisdom and capability if people are just guided with some very basic steps that they can take. You know, whether also it is about looking at some traditional knowledge ways of how we should deal with water needs to be brought back, building storage capacities within communities in rural areas, especially wells and so on, are things we can be doing. Being able to ensure that we are able to pump water from water, groundwater, and to make sure that we're not doing it in a way that actually destroys the aquifer. All of this knowledge is what comes out in Water is Love. But what I think is needed in addition is almost an accompanying sort of step-by-step guide about what are the 20 things that communities can do that the What is Love sets the basis for, but maybe a little more detail, so that people are not waiting for somebody to come and tell them do this or do that. They should be able to see it, know it, and act on it. So I am deeply passionate about grassroots activism generally and grassroots mobilization for whatever issue we are facing. And I thought What is Love makes a very powerful argument about why local efforts are now critically important. And I believe that if communities at the local level start moving, preferably with the support of their local governments, but even if they don't have it, eventually, once communities start organizing, the governments will come because they will not want to be irrelevant and so on.
Yeah, it was certainly the case in India, the story that we showed in the film. Yeah, thank you. As a co-director, I feel very moved by your words. And also what you share about the traditional knowledge, because actually what we are talking about is not even something new. In many places, traditional knowledge system, indigenous communities, of course, knew how to take care of water, of land in ways that is regenerative, that is restorative. Um, and yeah, it is also, I think there's such a paradox when we deal with the climate crisis, where everybody knows we need to act, and at the same time it seems so overwhelming and so abstract and so much out of reach to be able to do something. And so there's a gap here that we need to close, and you spoke to this. And another question on that level also that I want to ask you is, because as an activist you also both practice and speak about the need for art and creativity, um, and I see it also as a connecting point in order to actually unleash the power of doing something. I wonder if you could share both about the importance, but also where this came from for you and how you practice it.
So it actually comes from recognizing that the biggest challenge that activism faces is a communications deficit. We are not reaching the people that we need to reach, the majority of the people, with a language and a message that is easily accessible, understood, and urgent enough that people feel, oh, I understand it and I must act. We are so far away, and that's why movies, documentaries, song, dance, all of these things are critical resources right now for us to be able to reach the numbers of people that we need to is as fast as possible. So mobilizing the parts of power of arts and culture is critically important. Having said that, I'm not suggesting that harnessing the power of arts and culture on its own will deliver us salvation from the climate crisis and the intersecting crises.
Right.
However, I have no doubt in my mind that failure to harness the power of arts and culture almost guarantees that we will fail. So, my first inspiration, big sort of epiphany moment comes when the artist Olafur Eliasson invites me to Iceland for a funeral. And it was a funeral for an iceberg.
Mm.
And at this event where Mary Robinson, the Prime Minister of Iceland, and myself spoke in September of 2019, we did not speak about degrees and parts per million and very complicated scientific things. We spoke about loss. We spoke about, yes, the iceberg that's been there for thousands of years and it's lost and it's not coming back, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
everybody understands loss, whether you lost a lover by a breakup or whether you lost a family member or friend through death. People have an understanding of loss and the pain of loss, right? And so the media coverage, the impact, the way that that relatively inexpensive event, the impact it had, right? There were no helicopters or ships or anything involved in that action, you know, was more impactful than 95% of the actions that happened under my leadership when I was at Greenpeace. And so I began to work with Olafur along these lines. And then I also had a personal sort of tragedy where our son, who was a very popular
Mm.
rapper and hip hop artist in South Africa, said to us, you guys are not very good at what you'll do, because when I look at all the things you've been fighting for as teenagers, you know, human rights, democracy, and all of that, when I look at the world, it's all moving in the wrong direction. And when we asked, why is it you think we're failing? He said, you'll aim all your messages and your narratives at the brain, and you'll ignore the heart, the body, and the soul. And people are moved, yeah. And if you look at some of the fascist forces in the world today, they bypass the brain and they go straight here and
Right.
weaponize all sorts of hate, you know, othering people, you know, discriminating against immigrants, all of these things, right? And so artivism, bringing together arts, culture, and activism, offers us two things. One is the capability to mobilize the people on the numbers that we need to mobilize them. And then secondly, firstly, we need that to put those numbers to put pressure on our government and business leaders to move much faster than they appear willing to move at the moment. But there's another reason. And another reason is we need to offer people multiple pathways of joyful participation, things that people can be involved in where it's very real, very local. They can start it on one day, and 3 months they can see, hey, water is flowing or something is happening, and it gives them a sense of accomplishment and joy. So the second purpose is, given the global mental health crisis being brought about as a result of eco-anxiety and climate anxiety, it's offering participation itself
Mm.
can be an antidote to despair, depression, and a sense of, oh my God, it's too big, right? We have to create, what I love about What is Love is that it actually is offering bite-sized options of how people can participate. You know, you don't have to
Right.
take on the whole crisis of climate change, which has so many complicated elements and so on. But if you actually focus on water, which is, you know, the absolute basic necessity for human survival, and you try to protect it in your neighborhood in the short and in the long term, and the sense of accomplishment and joy that can come out of doing something that actually you can easily do, it's easier to do with the support of the state, whether it's national, provincial, or local. But actually, some of these initiatives, through local initiative, local fundraising, and so on, you can actually do it even if you reach blockages there, right? And so the global artivism movement is alive and kicking and is growing and growing and growing. We had the inaugural Global Artivism Conference that took place in South Africa last year with 89 countries, 750 people. On the 3rd to the 5th of May in Salvador, Bahia, Brazil, will be the
Mm.
second artivism convening with more than 100 countries and hopefully 1,500 people. And the movement is gaining momentum. And now, many people, as we see the rise of fascism in so many parts of the world right now, there is a recognition that we have to win the hearts and minds of people, and and therefore, positively, I see more and more focus on arts and culture. But I think it's critically important for us to recognize that we don't want to go to artists and tell artists, oh, we are, you know, NGO leaders and you need to join us. Artists are not waiting for us. They, based on their own reading of the world, are doing amazing things already. We need a respectful relationship between conventional activism and artivism, and we have to ensure that more resources are available for artists who struggle, in irrespective of which discipline you look at within the broad artistic world. We need to also be advocating for more resources to go to people and groups who have better possibility of communicating the urgency of the moment that we find ourselves in. And it doesn't always have to be big bureaucratic NGOs. It can be an individual artist, who has the capability to have, 500 million followers and that kind of thing. And we need to broaden. The last thing I would say, we have to broaden the definition of what is an activist,
Mm,
right? An activist is not simply somebody who works full time for an NGO, trade union, or a faith based institution. We need people who are teachers, who can paint murals in communities, for example, on how to conserve water, right? We need them to bring their artistic skills into the community, teach kids on how to do murals. And it's best, activism is most sustainable when we're asking people to do things which they love,
right.
not things like, for example, to take somebody who's a creative and put them in a meeting to talk about policies and resolutions and boring constitutional issues would be a waste of their skills and talents and so on. But if you get them to say, hey, if you're a teacher or if you're a filmmaker, can you run workshops in communities for up and coming filmmakers, right? And how they can, use the cell phones to capture images and put them in collages that communicate through social media and elsewhere. That would give people more, if you want, joyful experience because you're drawing on what gives them joy. So we need multiple pathways for participation around climate justice struggles, and thankfully, these are all things that are happening. We just need to make sure it happens faster on a larger scale, given that we are certainly running out of time to avert catastrophic, runaway, irreversible climate change.
Thank you, Kumi, for your passion and also for reminding us of the deep reconnecting function of art, but also honoring our grief. Maybe just before we close this conversation, how can people get involved with both the artivism movement, but also the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty initiative? What are ways for people to enroll?
Thank you. So with the fossil fuel treaty initiative, there are a few things that people can do. Firstly, you can sign up as an individual supporter so that you start getting all the updates of what's happening and so on. And I urge people to sign up and get as many people in your lives, family, friends, relatives, um, uh, current girlfriend, ex-boyfriend, whatever it is. You can just reach
Get
out
all
and
your loves.
encourage people to sign up. Right, that helps us to broaden the community of people pushing for a binding treaty. The second is everybody lives in a city or in a rural area with some local government that they live under. So what we say is make it your task to go and mobilize people in your community to convince your city council or your local government of whatever shape or form to endorse the idea of moving towards a binding treaty that secures our children's future, where we get off the main course of climate change, which is fossil fuels. That's the second thing you can do. The third thing is you can always use your social media to promote what is happening and look and don't feel that like I'm sitting here with the answers of how people can contribute. Help answer the question yourself.
Right.
Suggest ways in which you think that people like myself who are old and decrepit have not yet, come up with. Then on the Artivism conference, we will be making a call in the coming weeks on the website globalartivism.org to encourage people to join the different efforts. And we will be setting up a thing called the Global Stakeholder Forum where anybody, anywhere in the world can join to be part of the movement. Then come November, from the 3rd to the 5th of November in Salvador, Bahia, Brazil, there will be the second Artivism convening. So those of you who can find your way there and participate, strongly, strongly encourage it. But just knowing that we won't be able to have everybody be there that will be interested. There will be a serious online component to that convening so that people around the world can be part of this growing movement. So join the sign up for the newsletter, join the stakeholder forum, and at a minimum, please join the online version of the conference. And if you can make it there, please attend. But also, in the coming weeks, we will be issuing a call for expressions of interest for people who want to run training workshops and so on. So people who have ideas and have things to contribute are very, very welcome to contribute to the shaping of the program of the second Artivism convening. And what I'll say in conclusion to people, we all have a simple choice. We can either be part of the problem or part of the solution.
Mm.
And adopting a position of neutrality is choosing to be part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
You can be part of the solution by saying that this struggle is not about saving the planet, right? The reality is the planet does not need saving, because if we continue on the suicidal trajectory that we're on, we destroy our water resources, we destroy our soil, we warm up the planet, we can't grow food. The end result is we will be gone, the planet will still be here. And once we become extinct as a species, the forests will recover, the oceans will replenish, and so on. So don't worry about saving the planet. Understand the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change is nothing more and nothing less than protecting our children and their children's futures, and do get involved. Don't leave it to politicians, to NGO leaders, to business people or anybody. We need everybody involved right now. And if you're a parent or a grandparent, even thinking about investing money for your children's future and education and so on. Okay, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that if you are able to do that, but the biggest investment that any parent and grandparent can make for their children and grandchildren is become informed about what climate change means and get involved and find your place in this movement and make your contribution. However big, however small, doesn't really matter. And looking at doing something around water in the community that you live in is not a bad place to start.
Mm. Thank you. And for people who want to start by watching Water is Love, you can do so freely at waterislovefilm.org. And as Kumi was also saying, speaking for the need for ways to implement this, if you're an educator, we have developed a whole kit for you to actually bring the film to your school to educate, to for children to learn water retention. So these are also ways. Kumi, thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you for your clarity, your deep encouragement, your visionary leadership, and for these absolutely vital initiatives that you're leading, and for sharing about it. And yeah, may all these efforts succeed and blossom. And yeah, sending you lots of solidarity and love.
Thank you. Same to you and your team and your colleagues, and wishing this What is Love will add a very important energy and
Mhm.
inspiration and activation to many, many people who are not yet currently involved in addressing the biggest challenge that humanity faces, which is to avert catastrophic climate change. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. May it be so.